Welcome back to Journalism 102, and today's lesson is all about AP style. So, for many of you, I've been indicating that we were about to get to this portion of the class, and here we are. So, AP style, AP stands for Associated Press. You've been asked to purchase the Associated Press style book for this class, and this is when we start to apply the rules of AP style to the stories that you're writing for this class. So I'm focusing on what I call the 12 big rules for AP style. These are the rules that I really do recommend that you memorize. I'm not going to recommend that you memorize the AP style book because if you've looked at it, you've seen what a huge task that would be. Nobody memorizes the AP style book, but what we do is familiarize ourselves with how to use it so that we know when to look things up. So my rule of thumb is if I'm not 100% sure I know what the rule is, I look in my AP style book or Google it or use the AP style app. All of these things are options. So the rules that I'm really going to expect you to know and use and understand are being presented in this PowerPoint. So number one, state abbreviations. So why AP doesn't follow standard zip code abbreviations, not really sure, but we just have to accept it and move on. So the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change. And that would be the case with AP style. So each state has its own abbreviation. You should clearly know that it's MISS period for Mississippi. New York is N period, Y period, and so on. You probably don't want to bother memorizing all of the states, but rather what you want to do is know that when you're using a state other than Mississippi, you should look up how to abbreviate it properly. One of the things that's a little tricky about even the abbreviation Mississippi is that we don't always use it when we're writing local stories for local readers or telling websites that primarily service local readers. So you're not going to write Oxford, comma, MISS period. If you're living in Oxford and reading about Oxford in a local publication, you know you're in Mississippi. So what gets a little tricky about it is figuring out what communities are going to be so well known to your audience that you don't need to add the state abbreviation. And that's really just a judgment call. So I would probably err on the side of including MISS period rather than doing away with it. 8 states, here's the list, aren't abbreviated at all. And you don't use state abbreviations for really major U.S. cities. So Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, etc. These cities are presumed to be so well known that you really don't need to include a state abbreviation with them at all. AP style number 2, titles. I would say this is the rule that trips up more inexperienced journalists than any other that I encounter. And what I would say is that you want to err on the side of lowercasing versus capitalizing. I see way more mistakes being made by random capitalization of titles versus lowercase titles that should have been capitalized. So you only capitalize formal titles when they come before an individual's name, when they precede that person's name. If it falls after, lowercase it. So here you see Mayor John Appleseed signed the proclamation. Mayor is going to be capitalized. But if you set it off in commas, make it a parenthetical, John Appleseed, Mayor of Lowminster, Mass., attended the banquet, you see that mayor is not capitalized. So unless that title is coming right before the person's name, no capital letters. And in general, you want to be thinking every time you use a title, where am I putting this? Is this before the person's name or after the person's name? If it's directly before the person's name, go ahead and capitalize it. but otherwise make it lowercase. Numbers, lots of rules about numbers. You're going to use your AP style book frequently when using numbers and trying to figure out how to use them appropriately. So typically in AP style for print, we spell out whole numbers below 10 and use figures for 10 and above. So you see in the sample sentence, 3 apples spelled out, but 12 mangoes using the numeral. For percentages, which a lot of you, I'm sure, will be doing stories that incorporate percentages, we use the numerals with the word percent, not the symbol percent. So 12% would be the numeral 12, and then the word spelled out, one word, percent. When we start to write in broadcast style, which is just ahead in this class, the rules are a little bit different again. So a lot of people who are multi-platform journalists will buy both the Associated Press handbook for print and the handbook for broadcast. We don't have you do that just to sort of cut down on the cost of books, and because the differences are such that I think we can explain them verbally for the projects that you will do. AP style rule number 4, months, dates, and seasons. So there are times when you abbreviate the month and there are times when you don't. So if you are using a specific date, you would abbreviate all of the months that are more than 5 letters. So April, June, May, those months are never abbreviated. But if a month has more than 5 letters, you do abbreviate when you're using it with a specific date. If it's all by itself, or if it's with a year, so if you said something was going to happen in April 2014, you would spell out the month, April, and use the year. Now that was a bad example. So January 2014, you would spell out the word January and use it with the full date. We don't use ordinal numbers like first, second, third, and this is a little bit confusing to people because when we speak, we say, oh, that's going to happen on the 15th. But if you're writing about it, you would say, oh, that's going to happen June 1/5. So writing out, using the numerals, not writing it out as 15th or even 15 with a TH after it. The seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, never capitalized, and that trips up students writing, because a lot of times we're talking about things that happen by semester. So, fall 2013, our inclination is to capitalize that, and it would not be capitalized. One other thing as it relates to years and dates, if you're talking about something happening within this calendar year, so within the year 2013, you often don't include the year. So if I were going to say that something was going to happen May 15, I would not put May 15, 2013, because it's presumed that if it's in this calendar year, you don't need to use the date. Street addresses. Street, avenue, and boulevard are abbreviated when you have the number included. So if you're saying that something is occurring at 412 West Jackson Avenue, 412 West Jackson Avenue, you would abbreviate the word avenue, AVE. But if you're just saying that something takes place on Jackson Avenue, you spell it out. So if you have the number, you abbreviate street, avenue, and boulevard. Other words like road, drive, lane, way, court, etc. are not abbreviated. So rule of thumb with a lot of these things, you know that there are rules about dates. You know that there are rules about numbers. You know there are rules about street addresses. When you're using one, until you feel like you are 100% confident you know what the AP style rules are related to those topics, use your book, Google it, use your app. these are things that you will eventually become very familiar with, but in the beginning, it's best to not lose the points and just go ahead and use the book. Composition titles. So this is different than maybe what you've learned in writing research papers and other content for English classes. So magazines and newspaper titles are not italicized. They are just capitalized. Other forms of composition, so books, videos, TV shows, movies, they are put in quotation marks. So here's an example of what we're talking about. New York Times is a newspaper. It is not italicized. It is not in quote marks. It is simply written like a title with capitalized words, right? If you're talking about a movie, it goes in quotation marks. TV show, quotation marks. And books, quotation marks. So again, if you're using one of these, just to be on the safe side, get in the habit of looking it up until you feel really confident. So with money, you use the dollar sign and the decimal point only if the amount is uneven. So you'll see here are examples. If it's $2.50, you do dollar sign to decimal point 50. But if it's an even number, you just do dollar sign and the number. You write out the word cents instead of using the symbol. And we typically use exact figures until we hit the $1 million mark. After that, you spell out the word and use decimal points to indicate, fractions of bigger numbers. So 6.28 billion. You'll see here the example. Again, this is something that I routinely still look up just because when you're writing about money, the rules vary so frequently. In broadcast, it's different still. So these are the kinds of things, get in the habit of looking them up. Unless you become a business writer, you probably will use your AP style on money stories all the time. All right, punctuation. So we've talked about some of this. Periods and commas go inside quotation marks. Another interesting thing about AP style is no comma before the conjunction in a simple series. So we like to write in series of 3. I've already seen it in some of your drafts. And what I've had to do on several of your drafts is remove the comma right before the conjunction. So here's the example. Something's red, white, and blue. In English, in grammar, we're taught that we should put a comma before the word and in that sentence. In AP style, we do not put a comma before the word and. And another punctuation related issue, I think I only have seen this in one person's draft, but don't use exclamation points. So I guess it's editorial to use exclamation points, and so it's best to just go without them. So AP style does not use exclamation points within quotes. Academic degrees, most likely, since you're covering stories that often have a relationship to higher education, or your expert comes from higher education, you are probably going to end up referring to someone's academic degree. So it's actually, according to AP style, best to not abbreviate a degree. So PhD is not preferred. Instead, using the term doctorate. In addition, you really want to think about, in the context in which you're interviewing someone, whether or not that degree is relevant. So you might talk to a professor about their passion for bicycling, but they happen to be an English prof. Probably no reason to even mention that they're an English professor. So sometimes the degree is not relevant at all to the story. Sometimes it is. If you're talking to an expert on counterterrorism, about a recent incident in the Middle East, then it's important to include that person's credentials and their degrees. So for a specific degree, you capitalize the degree name, but not the subject unless it's a word that we routinely capitalize. So if Sue had a Master of Science degree in English, then the word English would be capitalized. Otherwise, it's going to be lowercase. If you just said Sue has a master's in English or a master's in psychology, the word master's would not be capitalized. So it's only if we're using a specific degree name. So students who get a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, you're going to write Sue has a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism. Bachelor Arts and Journalism are all going to be capitalized. But if you said Sue has a degree in journalism, the word journalism would not be capitalized. Ages. For ages, we always use figures. So if you know grammar well, then this will probably help you. If the age is used as an adjective or it substitutes for a noun, then it's hyphenated. And if not, it's not hyphenated. So our examples here, 21-year-old modifies the word student. It's used as an adjective and you hyphenate it. But in the next example, the student is 21 years old, then it's not being used as a adjective. It is simply being used to describe this student. So the girl 8 has a brother 11. In the third or fourth example, the contest is for 18-year-olds. That substitutes for the noun. So you could say the contest is for Bill. And then the other thing is about age ranges. We don't use apostrophes. We simply add the S. So he is in his 20s. This is true also for dates. If you said, that person is so 80s, you would do 80 and then the S, small lowercase s, not 80 apostrophe S. So with names, you use a person's first and last name the first time they are mentioned in a story. After that, you default to their last name for every subsequent reference. So on second reference, third reference, etc. Sometimes we make exceptions if it's a child, a 6-year-old, you're probably not going to call him or her by her last name throughout the story. Or sometimes if you have two people with the same last name, you're interviewing a family, you might use first names throughout just to avoid confusion. Something that's hard for a lot of very well raised Southerners, I find, is that they don't like to drop the courtesy titles, Mr., Mrs., Dr., Ms. But that's what journalists do. So we refer to people by their last names only. So as much as it might pain you to start referring to a professor by their last name throughout the story, that is appropriate AP style. And number 12, times. So the exact time when an event occurs often really doesn't matter. So if you go to a news conference, you're probably not going to tell people what time that news conference began and ended. But if you're trying to tell people about upcoming events, things that they may want to participate in, a city council meeting, a play, a movie, you may want to indicate to them the time. And so when that is important, you use figures, with the exception of noon and midnight, and you use a colon to separate hours from minutes, but you only do that if it's not on the hour. So you'll see in the example 1 p.m., so that starts right on the hour of 1. If it started at 1:15 p.m., you would use the colon and the numbers 1 and 5. You see how p.m. and a.m. are lowercase with periods. And the other thing to remember, and I fall into this habit as well, I have to remind myself, I might say something like, at 7 p.m. tonight. Well, it's not really important to have the word tonight in there. PM indicates that it is going to be 7 in the PM is going to be nighttime. So you want to make sure that you are aware of those rules and again, use your book. So these are the 12 AP style rules that I'm going to very much focus on. As you revise your drafts, you will want to make sure that at least these 12 things within your story that you have formatted correctly. And you should get in the habit of having your AP style book or app or be ready to Google these questions as you're writing and before you turn in final drafts.